Wow, joining us as he always does at the end of the month for a bit of a detailed look into the world of diplomacy and international politics, what's going on around the world. For this month, we have a very special guest, Ambassador Yunyo Chol, in the studio. How are you doing today, Ambassador?
Very good. How about you?
Yeah, mate, I cannot complain. I had a good summer despite all the restrictions and stuff.
And weather's cooling down already.
Yeah, it's very comfortable at the moment, and it is about time to go back to work and in the schools. I know my son definitely needs to go back to school. Yeah, it is. And it's also been a very interesting summer on the diplomatic front, hasn't it? So what are we going to talk about today?
We have talked about the United States and China too long, and we will see how things in Afghanistan evolve after this withdrawal. But this time, let's go to Africa and go back in time, because there's a new movie released in late July titled Escape from Mogadishu, which is largely based on a true story, though the movie doesn't make that claim clearly.
Right. Yeah, so I tell you what, going back to Somalia, the early 90s, wasn't it? I was a bit young for this, but I do remember some of the sort of snippets in my memory of what was going on there.
General ID and everything.
We've all seen Black Hawk Down as well, which is a very
Exactly.
famous movie about what happened there in Mogadishu. But what is this movie about then?
As I said, the backdrop is Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia in East Africa in 1990, when the dictatorship of Siad Barre was coming to an end, with the resistance by rebels getting out of control. During that period of diplomatic competition between South and North Korea was so fierce, particularly in Africa, where North Korea had an edge due to Africa's disenchantment with the West and popularity of socialism and non-alignment among them. But when the whole system and political social order broke down, the chaos, anarchy, and violence set in with the indiscriminate looting and killing. Now all you look for is your own survival. That's when the South Korean ambassador extends a helping hand to his North Korean counterpart to escape from this living hell together. So the viewers are deeply touched by the shared sense of humanity and brotherhood between these two supposedly opposing groups.
Right, and I mean, movies like this in Korea are very popular, aren't they? I mean, the JSA movie was...
There was Berlin also.
Right, they're very popular because it is such an interesting thing. At the end of the day, we are talking about two countries opposing ideologies, but not necessarily opposing history and culture, are they? It sounds like a very tight situation. It's no doubt going to be pretty touching, but was this sort of faithful to what really happened?
Well, I said largely, as there are some modifications that the creators of the movie may have found necessary. I had heard the story from the Korean ambassador himself during mid-90s, I remember. I was in almost tears when he described the moment they realized the North Korean driver was not moving after going through the barrage of fire. He was already shot and dead.
Wow.
It was so gripping that I thought this would make a great movie material. Ambassador Kang, in the movie it is Ambassador Han, even wrote a novel about this, but it didn't sell.
Well, I'll tell you what, maybe the movie's going to kickstart some sales on that book then,
Yeah. So the first big difference from the reality was that it was the South Korean ambassador who offered his help to North Koreans when the letters were stranded at the airport with the planned rescue flight was canceled. And the North Koreans had nowhere to go due to the looting of their embassy. And in the movie, North Koreans, again, in face of threat of looters and increasing violence, decide to go to the South Korean embassy. And South Koreans initially rebuff their request, then relent to receive them.
Right.
And secondly, the movie describes the South Korean intelligence officer trying to score big by creating a fait accompli situation with forged defection documents. The North Korean counterpart finds it out, and two gets into a fist fight over this. The truth is there was no such attempt by South Korean side, nor any effort to persuade them into defecting to South Korea. They didn't have any ideological debate and stayed as one group throughout the crisis. thirdly, when this united group of South and North Koreans approached the Italian embassy in Mogadishu, they all waved South Korean flags for the Italians to accept them. In the movie, they all waved simple white flags.
Right.
Again, there really was no ideological or political division among them. Only their collective survival was at stake. So maybe this modification was out of concern that the current North Korean government might take it wrong and regard it as a slight or provocation.
Right, you do have to be sensitive about those sort of things, especially if it's a movie where you are trying to create, I suppose, or retell a story of rare unity between North and South Korea. And, you know, I mean, when your back's against the wall and you're looking death down the barrel of a gun, maybe ideology doesn't really matter that much, does it? And you do sort of see, you know, these people who look like you, speak like you, and in many ways still think like you, more brothers in arms than enemies.
Right.
The truth is obviously going to be very, very dramatic. But we'll go back to the competition, the rivalry between the two Koreas in Africa. You also served there as well yourself, didn't you?
Right, I did. So right after my tour of duty at the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C. from 92 to 95, I was transferred to Cote d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, as DCM, meaning number 2 guy in the embassy, but we had only 5 people. So it's a small mission. So, but long before that, I had worked with the West Africa Division of the Korean Foreign Ministry in 1987. So it was yet before the end of the Cold War, and I was able to witness through many past reports the diplomatic race between South and North Korea in Africa. So the statistics that I still remember is out of 44 black African or sub-Saharan African countries, North Korea had 40 missions, while South Korea had only 27.
Wow.
By the way, those countries in North Africa along the Mediterranean, they are a little bit different. They are better off, and they are Arabic people, and it is called Maghreb. Anyway, so in 1990, the movie's background, the competition must have been at its peak. Though with the fall of Berlin Wall in November 1989, the communist bloc was already on the verge of collapse. So, but at the time, no contact between North Koreans, with the North Koreans were allowed for South Korean diplomats. So South and North avoided each other in official events as if the other side didn't exist.
Just ignoring each other, yeah?
So, yes. So when South Korea succeeded in its northern policy, 북방 정책, of making new diplomatic relationship with former communist countries, which used to be former friends of North Korea, these restrictions eased, and our overstretched network of missions across Africa was streamlined. So when I arrived in Abidjan, the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, in February 1995, we were covering many other neighboring countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, Togo, Benin, and Liberia, where we used to maintain our tiny embassies. Most listeners might hear those names of countries for the first time. So as DCM, number 2 guy, I traveled to those countries for occasions like ceremony for aid donation, which included Korean Sonara, sedans, and this company disappeared. Sambo, Trigem, personal computers.
Yeah.
So these were items we offered.
Wow.
So these modest items were appreciated so much and used by their foreign ministry. So I was a popular person when I do this, and my counterpart in the government of Cote d'Ivoire, the better one, where I was based at the time, was the Director General for Asia, Mr. Sylvestre Kwasibile. He's now Ivorian ambassador to Korea.
Oh, nice.
So now we don't have our embassy in Somalia. The country is still unstable and dangerous. So the Korean embassy in Kenya is covering Somalia from there.
Right. Now, you have got a rather extensive history in Africa, and I know you were in Cairo for some time as well, and you had a North Korean colleague or counterpart while you were there, yeah?
Right. When I was ambassador to Egypt, I used to run into my North Korean counterpart, Ambassador Ma, on some diplomatic gatherings like Asian Ambassadors Group monthly lunch. And Cairo used to be the hub for North Korea's Africa diplomacy. And Egypt, on their part, also cherishes gratitude for North Korea's assistance during their 1973 war with Israel. But between us two, if there had been any rivalry or animosity, he did very well.
Right,
I didn't see any of it.
Very
so
nice.
we were courteous to each other, and we never created any confrontational atmosphere. But you had to be very careful about choice of your words.
No doubt.
So I was more forthcoming to Mr. Ma, who also welcomed me, though he tended to disappear quietly after our initial friendly greetings.
Interesting.
Still, we even shared our hope for a breakthrough when inter-Korean dialogue was going well. So I hope he's doing all right in the midst of this pandemic. I don't know whether he is still there or not, but I hope he'll be all right, even with the life of unpredictability for North Korean officials. Someday, somewhere, we might have our own reunion.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, it would be very interesting. Now, this movie also describes South Korea's bid to join the United Nations as one of the reasons for reinforced diplomatic efforts throughout Africa. Now, is this necessarily true? How South Korea joined the UN? Were you involved in that process?
Well, throughout the Cold War years, the United Nations was used as a forum for confrontation between the East and West, and also between South Korea and North Korea over our legitimacy on the Korean Peninsula. And the Security Council at the UN is always divided. And both sides continued their operation of building support in the General Assembly. And in 1975, both of the two resolutions of the opposing sides were adopted. This is crazy. The two confrontational resolutions were both adopted. So this was a very big embarrassment, and the attempt to push for resolutions in the General Assembly was dropped since then. But I was in the United Nations Division in 1990 when Korea started its push for full UN membership. And we were just observer states in the body because of the divided Security Council. And this attempt was regarded as risky business because somebody had to take a responsibility if this goes wrong. But we had a few gutsy leaders and committed diplomats who were very strategic, proactive, and hardworking. So what we once deemed impossible was finally achieved. I mentioned the Northern policy, 북방 정책, was very successful, and the imminent end of the Cold War was working in our favor. So North Korea found very little ground to resist and decided to join South's bid. And they presented a very convoluted pretext of blocking South's unilateral possession of membership. They joined. They agreed to joint membership of UN, which was proposed by the South. So in September 91, South and North Korea joined the United Nations. At that time, unfortunately, even though officially I was the member of United Nations Division, I was seconded to the office of the Foreign Minister as his personal assistant. But still, I'm very proud to have been a member of UN Division.
No doubt, no doubt. Now, how significant was that at the time? Now, we already had a Korean Secretary General there who was somewhat your mentor, yeah?
Yes. Our joining the United Nations was truly historic. As a divided nation in the midst of a Cold War, South Korea was a lonely country. It didn't belong to many international bodies. So when we acquired so-called partial dialogue partnership with ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations, in 1989, we were so happy. It was hailed as a big success. So full membership at the UN was a dream come true at that time. So after joining the UN in 1991, as you mentioned, we had the Korean Secretary General. Before that, we were elected to Security Council as non-permanent member in 1995 and again in 2013. And in 2001, Dr. Han Sung-soo, the Korean Foreign Minister, was elected President of the 56th UN General Assembly, and we had Ban Ki-moon. At the time, the Ban Ki-moon was chief of staff to this president of General Assembly, Dr. Han Sung-soo, and he had a very small squad, our own F4, Fantastic Four,
Right.
that included me. So we had a lot of fun at the time.
That is absolutely amazing stuff. How quickly Ban Ki-moon especially rose through the UN, and how important Korea became at the UN in such a small amount of time. But this movie describes, if we're going back to this movie, it describes an escape. You've got a bit of your own escape story, yeah?
Oh, yes. When COVID-19 was rapidly spreading in Egypt in the first half of 2020, the Korean travelers or KOICA volunteers and some Korean residents needed to be evacuated because of inadequate medical facilities as well as language problem. They only understand Arabic. So they were suddenly stuck due to the sudden closure of the airports by the Egyptian authorities, which also led to the cancellation of all the flights. But at that time, some major European countries like United Kingdom, France, or Italy, who had so many their own nationals trapped in Egypt, flew many chartered flights to evacuate them. So when there were vacancies on those flights, they made it available to foreign nationals who can also share the cost and reduce their burden. Fortunately, I had very close relationship with those ambassadors, so our almost instantaneous information sharing and mutual assistance was instrumental in having many such flights available to Koreans. So we managed to evacuate 125 of them by way of chartered flights by other countries. Sometimes the Egyptian carriers were not helping to our Korean travelers, citing some restrictions by British or French people, French authorities. But my communication with those ambassadors addressed the issue, and we were able to put the Korean travelers on board safely. So later, when we gathered enough number of Koreans to fly to Korea, the Korean community, in cooperation with my embassy, arranged a chartered flight of our own and carried 133 of them all the way to Seoul. So some people likened this experience to Exodus, the escape from Egypt in the Bible. So that was our own version of escape from chaos and fear. But I stayed behind until my official departure from Cairo.
Fair enough then. But so this movie might have brought back a few memories and a couple of emotions for you, yeah?
Right. This is not an impressive scene to the viewers, but to me. In the opening scene, they are taking a photo of their ceremony for a technical training scholarship for African students. This scene may have been chosen to show the chores the Korean diplomats are going through. But that's exactly what we do on the ground in developing countries. So I call ourselves public peddlers of good cause, because spreading education opportunities or improving their living conditions with water and sanitation and many other aspects is a good thing. So I hope those who watch this movie not only enjoy the thrill of shooting and car chase scenes, but also recognize the noble work the Korean diplomats in hardship posts are doing and the sacrifices they are making.
That is fantastic stuff. Hopefully they do. An interesting movie to keep your eyes on, folks. As always, though, if you do want to hear the ambassador's entire segment here, do head over to the website at gfn.or.kr and click on the link there. Ambassador Yoon, it's always a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Alex. See you.